3 days after giving birth, the young woman's own parents stood in her tiny Alberta apartment and said they would rather lose a daughter than live with the shame of what they believed she had done. They left her there with swollen eyes, a healing body, and a newborn at the center of a scandal they did not even understand. Less than an hour later, the same people who had called her a disgrace turned pale when the person she phoned arrived with a calm husband, a family lawyer, and the truth they had spent their whole lives refusing to see. Before we get into today's story, I want to do our little check-in in a slightly different way because this one really got under my skin. First, type "I'm here" and the province or city you're watching from, because I always love seeing how far these stories travel across Canada and beyond. Second, tell me this. If your own family judged you before asking a single honest question, would you forgive them quickly, or would that take years? Third, for everyone who always shows up with kindness, who likes, subscribes, and leaves thoughtful comments, I pray that God makes your burdens lighter, opens better doors for you, and keeps your home safe and peaceful. And last thing before I start, this story reminded me that sometimes the people who call themselves family only understand your worth after strangers treat you with more love than they ever did. So listen closely to what happened to me. My name is Isabelle Dubois, and for most of my life, I was the kind of daughter people praised in public and used in private. I grew up in Red Deer, Alberta, in a house that always looked respectable from the outside. My father, Thomas Dubois, liked everything in its place. His shoes were lined up by the door. His work jacket stayed in one exact section of the front closet. His coffee had to be strong, hot, and ready before 6:30 every morning. My mother, Camille Dubois, cared even more about what people thought. She kept our curtains clean, our lawn trimmed, our church clothes pressed, and my behavior under constant inspection. In our house, mistakes were not treated like part of growing up. They were treated like stains. By the time I was 10, I already knew the rules. Don't talk too loud. Don't ask too many questions. Don't embarrass the family. Don't make your parents repeat themselves. And above all, don't become the kind of girl people whisper about. I was always told those rules were for my own good. My mother said the world was cruel, especially to girls, and strict parents were the only thing standing between me and ruin. My father called it discipline. He liked that word, discipline. He used it when he checked my phone bill in high school. He used it when he decided which university programs were respectable enough for me to apply to. He used it when I once came home 20 minutes late from a library study group and found him sitting in the dark living room waiting like I had committed a crime. I was 18 when I first realized that the problem wasn't that my parents were overprotective. The problem was that they needed control more than they needed truth. That year, I had a panic attack at school so bad, I thought I was dying. My chest hurt, my fingers went numb, and I could barely breathe. I had been juggling exams, a part-time job at a grocery store, and the constant pressure of hearing my mother say things like, "A daughter only gets one chance to earn respect," or "One mistake can follow a woman forever." It happened in the hallway outside the office, and I remember sliding down the wall, shaking so hard I couldn't even answer when someone asked if I was okay. The person who stayed with me was Claire Bennett. Back then, she was my grade 6 teacher, but she had moved into school administration by the time I was finishing high school. She was the kind of woman who made people feel safe without trying too hard. Warm voice, clear eyes, steady hands. She didn't rush me. She didn't ask useless questions. She sat next to me on the floor, told me to match my breathing to hers, and stayed there until I stopped crying. I still remember one sentence she said to me that day. "Isabelle, being scared doesn't mean you're failing. It means your body has been carrying more than it should." I think that was the first truly gentle thing an adult had ever said to me without attaching a lesson, warning, or criticism to it. After that, Claire became one of those rare people who checked in on me without trying to manage me. She helped me look into student housing in Calgary when I got accepted into a college program there. She encouraged me to apply for a bursary when I was too ashamed to admit I needed help. When my mother wanted me to stay home and take a more appropriate path, Claire was the one who said, "You're allowed to build a life that feels breathable." I never forgot that. Years later, I moved to a small apartment in Calgary and built a quiet life that my parents never fully approved of but tolerated because it still looked decent enough to explain to other people. I worked remote admin contracts for a small insurance firm based in Edmonton. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills. I lived alone. I stayed out of trouble. I visited my parents just enough to avoid war. And I learned how to shrink myself into a version that looked calm, agreeable, and harmless whenever I was around them. Then, about a year before everything exploded, Claire called me. I nearly didn't answer because I was in the middle of a spreadsheet deadline, but when I saw her name, I smiled and picked up. "Claire?" I said. "Oh my God. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, then her soft laugh. "That depends on your definition of okay." We ended up talking for almost 2 hours that day. She told me she was teaching again after stepping back from administration. She told me her husband, Morgan Bennett, was doing contract engineering work around the province. She told me they had spent years trying to have a baby. Tests, procedures, heartbreak, false hope, more heartbreak. She told me all of that with the kind of honesty that only comes after someone is too tired to pretend they're fine. At one point she got quiet and I asked, "Claire?" "I feel silly even saying this out loud," she murmured. "But sometimes I think I'm grieving someone I've never even met." That sentence sat in my chest for days. A few months later, she asked if we could meet for coffee. It was early winter, cold enough that the sidewalks glittered with leftover frost. We met at a little cafe near Kensington. Claire looked beautiful, but tired in a way that no makeup could fix. Not messy, not dramatic, just tired all the way into her bones. Morgan came too. He was kind, careful, and the opposite of my father in every way that mattered. He listened when people spoke. He didn't interrupt. He had this calm, grounded energy that made me understand immediately why Claire had held on through so many hard years with him by her side. We talked about everything at first: school changes, Alberta weather, ridiculous grocery prices, the kind of things people say before the real conversation begins. Then Claire wrapped both hands around her teacup and looked at me. "I need to ask you something," she said. I smiled a little. "That sounds serious." "It is." Morgan leaned forward. "And you can say no. Please know that before anything else." I looked from one to the other. "Okay." Claire's eyes were already wet. "We've been told surrogacy may be our best chance. We're still speaking to doctors and a lawyer, and we know it's a huge thing. We know it's personal. We know it may sound shocking. But Isabel," her voice broke, "you were the first person I thought of who I trust." For a second, I honestly couldn't speak. Out of every woman in Alberta, every person in their world, they had thought of me. "Me?" I whispered. Claire nodded. "Only if you ever wanted to consider it. Only if it felt right. And if it doesn't, I will still love you and respect you exactly the same." Morgan added quietly, "We would do everything legally. Every protection. Independent legal advice. Medical care. Counseling. Every step." It should have sounded impossible. Too big. Too complicated. Too much. Instead, what I felt first was something I hadn't expected at all. Honor. Because Claire had once been the only adult who saw me clearly when I was drowning in a house full of rules and shame. And now, without pressure, without manipulation, she was trusting me with the most fragile hope of her life. I didn't answer that day. I went home, sat on my couch with my coat still on, and stared at my apartment wall for nearly an hour. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a narrow galley kitchen, cheap blinds, old radiator heat that clicked at night. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The kind of place where every mug, every lamp, every blanket had been chosen by me and not approved by someone else. Usually that felt comforting. That night, it felt like the walls were waiting. I knew exactly what my parents would think if they ever found out. They would never hear the words private surrogacy arrangement and see dignity, generosity, or careful planning. They would hear pregnant and unmarried and decide the story before I had even finished one sentence. That was the thing about my parents. Truth had never interested them as much as appearances did. Still, the question stayed with me. Not because I wanted to be a hero. Not because I thought it would magically heal my own old wounds. And definitely not because I misunderstood what a huge commitment it was. It stayed because every time I pictured Claire, I remembered the hallway floor, my shaking hands, and her voice saying I was allowed to build a life that felt breathable. After that first coffee, months of conversations followed. No pressure, no secret manipulation, no desperate speeches, just information, honesty, and room to think. I met with a doctor, then a counselor, then an independent lawyer in Calgary who explained everything in clear language. Alberta law, federal rules, reimbursements, consent, medical risk, birth arrangements, parental orders, paperwork, every part of it. I asked practical questions and awkward questions and emotional questions. Claire and Morgan answered all of them. When they didn't know something, they said so and found out. Nobody gaslit me. Nobody cornered me. Nobody said, "If you loved us, you would." That mattered to me more than I can explain. In my parents' world, love had always come attached to obedience. In Claire and Morgan's world, care came attached to respect. That difference changed everything. By spring, I said yes. The pregnancy itself was harder than I expected, but not in the ways people imagine. The medical side was difficult, of course. The fatigue, the nausea, the aching back, the strange emotional waves that came out of nowhere. But the hardest part was the secrecy. I told almost no one. Claire and Morgan knew, obviously. The doctor knew. The lawyer knew. One payroll manager at work knew, because I had to adjust some leave paperwork. That was it. My parents did not know. I told myself I would explain when the time was right, when there were signed documents, when I felt emotionally strong enough, when I could handle the storm that would follow. But as my body changed, every week I delayed, made the conversation feel bigger and uglier. Eventually, I made the stupid choice that tired, scared people often make. I said nothing and hoped I could manage the fallout later. By the time my mother found out, it happened in the worst possible way. I was 7 months along and had gone to Red Deer for my cousin Blake Lawrence engagement dinner. I wore the loosest dress I could find and a long cardigan, praying I could get through a few hours without comments. I should have stayed home. I knew that from the second I pulled into my parents' driveway and saw all the extra cars lined along the curb. The house smelled like roast chicken, perfume, and furniture polish. My mother took one look at me in the hallway and froze. She didn't say anything right away, which was worse. Her eyes dropped to my stomach, then snapped back to my face. "What is this?" she asked under her breath. I swallowed. "Mom, what is this, Isabel?" People were still taking off shoes behind me. My aunt was carrying a salad bowl toward the kitchen. My cousin Blake was laughing in the dining room. The whole house felt balanced on one splintering second. "We need to talk privately," I whispered. My mother's face went cold.
No.
I asked you a question. My father had stepped into the hallway by then. "What's going on?" Camille looked at him and said the words like they tasted rotten. "Your daughter is pregnant." The house went silent in that awful, unnatural way that only happens when a family drama starts in public, but everyone pretends they're not listening.
My father stared at me.
"Is that true?" I felt every eye in the room turn in my direction. "Yes," I said. That one word changed the air around me immediately. Not one person asked if I was safe. Not one person asked if I was okay. My mother hissed. "By who?" I looked at my father, at my aunt, at Blake standing in the dining room doorway with her fiancé behind her, and every survival instinct inside me told me not to explain it there. Not in front of half the extended family. Not with my mother already wound-tight enough to humiliate me just to protect her own image. "Please," I said quietly, "not like this." My father's jaw tightened. "You walk into this house like this and expect us to ignore it?" I didn't say ignore it. I said not like this. My mother gave a short laugh that held no warmth at all. "That's rich. You create a disgrace, and now you want privacy." Blake spoke up then. "And Camille, maybe let her sit down first." Camille turned to her so sharply that even Blake fell quiet. "No," my mother said. "I will not have people act like this is some normal little misunderstanding." I wanted to disappear. More than that, I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to shout that this pregnancy was legal, planned, documented, and more honorable than half the marriages people in that room had clapped for. But it wasn't only my story. It was Claire and Morgan's as well. Their baby, their private struggle, their years of grief. I couldn't throw all of that into the hallway like broken glass just because my parents were cornering me. So I said the only thing I could. I'll explain later. And that was the wrong answer. My father's face hardened in a way I knew too well. There is no later. Either you say the father's name right now, or you leave. I stared at him. Dad.
Right now.
My throat closed. My mother folded her arms.
See?
She can't even say it. The humiliation of that moment still burns when I think about it. Not because I had done something shameful, but because I stood there carrying a child created through trust, law, and sacrifice, and the people who raised me looked at me like I was dirt under their shoe. I left 10 minutes later. No dinner, no goodbye, no explanation. I drove back to Calgary in the dark with both hands shaking on the steering wheel, crying so hard at one point I had to pull into a gas station outside Airdrie just to breathe. That night, my mother texted me, "I hope whatever man did this was worth losing your family over." I didn't reply. From that day on, my name in that family did not feel like my name anymore. The rest of my pregnancy became a split life. In one world, I had appointments, check-ins, legal updates, and soft, hopeful conversations with Claire about nursery colors, school lunch ideas, and whether the baby might inherit Morgan's impossible eyelashes. In that world, everything was handled carefully, respectfully, thoughtfully. There were forms, witnesses, schedules, reimbursements tracked exactly as required. There was nothing reckless about any of it. In the other world, I had missed calls from my mother, stiff messages from my father, and silence from relatives who had clearly heard some version of the story and decided not to ask questions. When I finally answered one of my mother's calls, it was because I was tired of being hunted by my own phone. She didn't say hello. "Are you going to tell us the truth now?" I sat on my couch, one hand pressed against the side of my stomach where the baby had been kicking all afternoon. "I am not lying." "Then tell me the man's name." "There isn't a man's name the way you think." She let out a sharp breath. "Stop talking in riddles. It is complicated."
No, Isabel.
Sin is usually very simple. I closed my eyes. That was my mother's favorite trick. Reduce a complicated reality into one ugly word, then use that word to make herself feel righteous. I said, "I'm safe. That should matter." "What matters," she snapped, "is that you have humiliated this family and you still won't show enough decency to explain yourself." Then my father got on the line. "Listen carefully," he said, voice flat. "Whatever mess this is, do not expect us to defend you." I remember laughing once, a tiny broken sound, because defend me? They were the ones attacking me. "I never asked you to defend me," I said. "No," he replied. "You just expect us to stand by and watch you destroy your life." That was the conversation where I stopped hoping that honesty, whenever I finally gave it, would soften them. Because deep down, I knew something ugly. They didn't want an explanation. They wanted a confession that matched the story they had already built. By the 8th month, I was exhausted. Physically, yes, but emotionally too. I spent mornings working from my kitchen table with compression socks on, my laptop balanced between piles of paperwork. I spent afternoons at appointments or walking slowly around the block when my hips hurt less. At night, I checked my locks twice even though Calgary was quiet on my street and nobody had ever bothered me there. My building was older, mostly young couples, students, and seniors. Safe enough. Ordinary enough. But I had started to feel watched by expectation itself. Sometimes my mother would send scripture with no message attached, just verses about shame, repentance, women, obedience. Sometimes my father would forward me links about single motherhood statistics with no context. It was like they were trying to punish me into admitting something ugly even when I had never done what they imagined. One evening, I showed Claire one of the messages while we sat in her car after an appointment. She read it, jaw tightening. "Isabel, this is emotional abuse." I stared out the windshield. "I know. Do you want me to help you tell them?" We can do it with the lawyer. Properly. I shook my head. Not yet. She was quiet for a second. Are you protecting them or yourself? That question hit harder than I wanted it to. I don't know, I admitted. The truth was, I still carried that child version of myself inside me. The one who believed that if I timed things perfectly, explained myself calmly enough, and never raised my voice, I could finally earn the understanding other daughters seemed to receive without begging. That version of me was still there, even after everything. And she was still waiting for my parents to become people they had never truly been. The first important document in all of this came in a thick envelope from the family lawyer Claire and Morgan had retained, Foster Green. The first time I met Foster, I expected someone cold and intimidating. Instead, he was careful and direct, the kind of lawyer who explained things in plain words and never treated emotion like inconvenience. This folder matters, he told me at his office in downtown Calgary. Keep a copy somewhere secure. If anyone challenges the arrangement, this answers more than you think. Inside were copies of the agreement, medical paperwork, reimbursement records, consent forms, and contact protocols after birth. Nothing dramatic. No surprise confession. Just the quiet weight of truth on paper. I kept the folder in the bottom drawer of my dresser under folded sweaters. At the time, I only thought of it as protection. I didn't yet understand how badly I was going to need it. The birth happened in early March during one of those Alberta weather swings that makes the whole province feel confused. The morning was gray and icy. By afternoon, the snow at the curb had turned to dirty slush. I went into labor before dawn and called Claire first, then Morgan, then the hospital line. By the time I was admitted, my contractions were close enough together that conversation came in broken pieces. I remember fluorescent lights, rubber soles squeaking on tile, Morgan filling out forms at the desk with calm hands even though his face was pale. Claire standing beside my bed with tears in her eyes because she was trying so hard not to overwhelm me. A nurse named Lauron, yes, actually Lauron, which made me almost laugh through pain, telling me I was doing well. Labor tore me open in ways I still don't have perfect words for. Not only physically, emotionally too, because I had prepared myself for the legal side, the medical side, the practical side. But no one can fully prepare you for the moment a baby enters the room and the air changes around everyone at once. When the baby cried for the first time, Claire made this sound I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was something deeper, like years of grief cracking open all at once to make room for joy. I cried too, not because I regretted anything, because the moment was holy in the plainest, most human way. The baby girl was healthy. Tiny and furious and perfect. Claire held her with both hands trembling. Morgan kissed Claire's forehead and then mine and said, voice shaking, "Thank you. Thank you. There aren't words for this." I smiled, even though I felt like my whole body was made of pain and exhaustion. Then don't try right now. Everyone laughed softly through tears. For a little while, it was peaceful. The birth paperwork, however, still required some careful timing and legal follow-up because private surrogacy arrangements are not the kind of thing you wave through with one signature and a smile. Foster had already prepared us for that. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was falling apart. It just meant there were a few days of process, confirmation, and formal steps before everything was fully settled the way it needed to be. Claire and Morgan stayed close. They arranged shifts. They coordinated with the hospital. They checked on me constantly. Claire kissed my forehead before leaving the first evening and whispered, "You gave us our daughter." I think I slept 2 straight hours after that just from emotional relief. And then my parents found out. Not because I told them. Because one of my aunts had seen a relative of a relative post something vague online about me being in the hospital, and in families like mine, gossip moves faster than ambulances. My mother called me when I was still sore, half-medicated, and trying to eat soup with one hand. I almost ignored it, but some foolish part of me thought maybe a grandchild, even one they believed came from shame, might pull something human out of them. I answered, "Hello." My mother did not ask how I was. She said, "So it's true." I leaned back against the hospital pillow and closed my eyes.
Mom, not now.
"Not now," she repeated. "After everything, You think you can still decide when we're allowed to react. I felt my stitches, the ache in my back, the heaviness in my chest. I just gave birth, and now you expect sympathy? That sentence settled into me like ice. I should have hung up,
I know that now.
but I was tired, raw, and stupidly hopeful. I'm asking you to be decent for 1 minute, I said quietly. My father's voice came on the line. Where are you? I hesitated. Where are you, Isabel? At the hospital in Calgary. We're coming. I should have said no. Instead, I made the mistake of believing there were some moments in life too serious for cruelty. My parents arrived the next day, wearing their best coats and their worst expressions. My mother stood at the foot of my hospital bed and looked around like she had entered a crime scene. So there really is a baby, she said. I stared at her. What did you think I was doing? Faking 9 months. My father ignored the question. Where's the father? I looked toward the bassinet area, even though the baby was with Claire at the nursery check. This is not your business in the way you think it is. My mother laughed once, sharp and disgusted. Not our business? You humiliate this family publicly, then give birth, and we're supposed to act like we're distant neighbors. I was too weak to argue the way I wanted to. Please lower your voice, I said. My father leaned in. Are you refusing to name him because he's married? Is that it? Older? Someone at work. I stared at him in disbelief. That was what he preferred to imagine. Adultery.
Filth.
Scandal. Anything but the possibility that there was a story bigger than his judgment. No, I said. And stop talking like that. My mother's eyes narrowed. Then what kind of respectable woman gives birth with no husband and hides everything from her parents? I wanted to tell her. The kind who learned early that her parents turn every truth into a weapon. Instead, I said, the kind who didn't trust you. The silence after that felt dangerous. My father straightened. Then maybe you made the right choice, because I don't recognize the daughter who would do this. That one hurt more than I want to admit. Not because I still thought I needed his approval, but because even after all these years, there was still a part of me that grieved every time he withheld love like it was a prize for perfect behavior. Claire and Morgan didn't arrive until after my parents had left that day, and I didn't tell them how ugly the visit had been. Not fully. I only said, they know now. Claire sat beside my bed. Do you want us to step in? Not yet. Morgan frowned. Isabel, you shouldn't have to manage this alone. I gave him a tired smile. I know, but again, I delayed. Again, I thought maybe if I kept the peace for one more day, if I got discharged and rested a little, if I found the exact right words, I could prevent the worst version of what was coming. I was wrong. 3 days after I gave birth, I was back in my apartment, moving like my body belonged to someone much older and much more fragile than me. The baby was with me temporarily that afternoon because of timing around paperwork and one final scheduled meeting, and Claire was supposed to arrive later. Everything had been coordinated. Everything was fine. Then my parents showed up unannounced. I opened the door wearing a loose sweater, holding my abdomen because it still hurt to stand too quickly. My mother took one look at my apartment and frowned like even my furniture embarrassed her. You live like this? She asked. I stared at her. Hello to you too. My father brushed past me without waiting to be invited in. That alone made my pulse jump. Dad, don't just walk in. He looked around the living room at the folded baby blanket on the couch, the bottles on the counter, the hospital papers stacked beside my laptop. So, this is what your choices led to. My body was already exhausted. My head started to pound almost immediately. What are you doing here? My mother set her purse on the chair like she planned to stay. We came to give you one final chance to act responsibly. Responsibly? Yes, she snapped. Name the father. Tell us what your plan is. And stop pretending this can be hidden. From the bedroom came the faint sound of the baby waking. My mother turned toward the noise. Something fierce and immediate rose in me. Don't. She looked back. Don't what? Do not go near her. My father's eyebrows lifted. Her. I realized then that they hadn't even known the baby was a girl. The sound came again, a small cry. Before I could move, My mother stepped toward the bedroom doorway. I got in front of her, every part of my body protesting. I said, "Don't." She looked offended. "Are you insane? I'm her grandmother." "No," I thought. "Not like this, you're not." I said, "You are not entitled to anything from me today." My father's face darkened. "Enough." He pointed toward the couch. "Sit down." I almost laughed from pure disbelief. A grown woman, in her own apartment, newly postpartum, being ordered around by the same man who used to inspect her room for hidden rebellion. "No," I said. That one word changed him immediately. He stepped closer. "You will not take that tone with me. And you will not come into my home and act like I'm 14. My mother cut in. "Home? This cramped little place where you brought a baby into shame?" The baby cried again, louder this time. Pain shot through my lower back as I turned toward the bedroom. "Stop yelling," I said. "You're upsetting her." My mother folded her arms. "Good. Maybe someone should be upset. Maybe that's the only way you'll understand what you've done." I went into the bedroom, lifted the baby carefully, and held her against my chest. She was so small, so warm, so innocent that even hearing my mother talk like that in the same apartment made me feel sick. When I came back out, my father looked at the baby only briefly before saying, "You cannot expect us to support this." I stared at him. "I never asked you to." "Then what do you expect?" he shot back. "That we come over with casseroles and congratulations while the whole family talks." There it was again. Not concern, not reality. Reputation. Always reputation. My mother's voice dropped into that cold, final register I knew too well. "We will not help a daughter who destroyed the family name." The room went still around me. Even the baby quieted for a second, like the apartment itself had heard her. I looked at my mother, then my father, then the doorway they had entered without permission, carrying all their judgment in with them like winter air. Destroyed the family name. I had spent months protecting the privacy of a woman who had once protected me. I had risked my body to carry a child with dignity, law, and love. I had endured gossip, shame, isolation, and physical pain. And these two people stood in front of me acting like I had ruined something sacred. What family name? I wanted to scream. The one built on fear? On silence? On control? On making your daughter feel filthy? For surviving you? Instead, I said very quietly, "Then leave." My father blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Leave." Camille looked almost shocked that I had spoken at all. "Excuse me? Leave my apartment." My father's face reddened. "Do not test me." A strange calm came over me then. Maybe because I was too tired to be afraid. Maybe because pain burns away a lot of old obedience. Maybe because I was finally holding proof in my arms that love could create something better than what I had come from. I repeated, "Leave." My mother picked up her purse.
Fine.
"If this is the path you want, don't come crying to us when it collapses." My father shook his head slowly. A daughter who kept this kind of filth secret was never raised by us. Remember that. Then they walked out. Just like that. 3 days after I had given birth, still bleeding, still healing, barely able to lift a kettle without pain, my own parents abandoned me in my little Calgary apartment and left me with their judgment echoing off the walls. The door shut. The apartment became silent. And I stood there with tears burning my eyes while the baby made a soft, restless sound against my shoulder. For about 10 seconds, I didn't move. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I picked up my phone. There were missed messages from Claire already, asking how I was doing and whether I needed anything picked up on the way. My hands were shaking as I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "Isabel." I could barely get the words out. "Claire," I whispered. "Can you come now?" Her voice changed instantly.
Yes.
What happened? I looked at the closed door, at the apartment my parents had just filled with shame, at the baby in my arms, at the folder in my drawer that suddenly felt heavier than ever. And for the first time in my life, asking the right person for help did not feel like weakness. "It's time," I said. Claire arrived in less than 40 minutes. To this day, I still don't know how she made it across Calgary that fast in late afternoon traffic, But when I heard the knock on my apartment door, something inside me unclenched for the first time since my parents had walked out. I opened it with the baby still against my shoulder. Claire stood there first, hair tied back, coat half-buttoned like she had dressed while moving. Morgan was beside her carrying 2 bags, one with baby supplies and one that looked like groceries. Behind them stood Foster Green in a dark coat, holding a leather folder under his arm. For 1 second, I almost started crying all over again from the sheer contrast of it. My parents had come empty-handed and full of shame. These people came prepared. Claire's face changed the moment she saw mine. "Oh, Isabel." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her before the cold air could follow. "What happened?" I tried to answer, but the words broke apart. Morgan took the grocery bag to the kitchen without saying anything, like he understood that practical help sometimes matters more than speeches. Foster gave me one careful nod. Not intrusive, just steady. Claire reached for my free hand. "Sit down first." The sentence was so gentle that it nearly shattered me. I sat on the couch slowly, wincing as my body reminded me that I was still only 3 days out from labor. Claire took the baby with expert tenderness, and the little girl settled almost immediately against her chest, as if she recognized the rhythm of her voice. "Hey, sweetheart," Claire whispered, kissing the top of her head. Morgan came back with a glass of water and crouched in front of me. "Tell us what they did." I swallowed hard. "They came here. They kept demanding the father's name. They said they wouldn't help a daughter who destroyed the family name." Claire shut her eyes for a second. Morgan's jaw tightened. Foster did not look surprised, which somehow hurt in a different way. "I told them to leave," I said. "And then I called you." Claire opened her eyes and looked at me with so much warmth that I felt almost ashamed for ever thinking I had to manage this alone. "You did exactly the right thing." I looked at Foster then. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." "You didn't drag me into anything," he said calmly. "You are in a vulnerable medical state, there is an active risk of harassment, and there are legal documents that may need to be presented sooner than expected. This is exactly when I'm supposed to be useful." I actually laughed a little through my tears. That sounded very lawyer. He allowed himself a small smile. "It usually does." That evening, the 3 of them moved around my tiny apartment like a quiet rescue team. Morgan put soup on the stove and loaded my dishwasher, even though I told him not to worry about it. Claire checked on my medication schedule and reminded me when I was due for pain relief, because I had completely lost track. Foster sat at my small kitchen table and reviewed the copies of the agreement with me again, page by page, making sure I understood what could and could not be challenged, what rights were already secured, and what next formal steps would make everything even tighter. At one point, he looked up and said, "Your parents have no legal claim here." "None. Their pressure is emotional, not lawful." I nodded, but my chest still felt tight. He noticed. "That does not mean it can't be harmful." Sometimes I think that's the part people don't understand. I admitted. When something has been happening your whole life, you start reacting to it before your brain catches up. Claire, still holding the baby, said softly, "Because your body remembers before your pride does." I looked at her and almost cried again. That first night after my parents left, Claire stayed with me while Morgan drove Foster home and then returned with extra supplies from their place. The apartment was dim except for the lamp by the couch and the light over the stove. Snow had started falling outside again, thin and dry against the window. At around 10, while the baby slept in the bassinet beside the couch, Claire and I sat with blankets over our legs and mugs of tea growing cold in our hands. "I should have told them earlier," I murmured. Claire did not rush to agree or disagree. That was one of the things I loved most about her. She never treated honesty like a competition. "Maybe," she said after a moment, "or maybe you knew exactly who they were and hoped they might still surprise you." I stared down at my mug. "Is that pathetic?" "No," her voice was firm now. "That is what children of controlling parents do, even as adults. We keep thinking one day the truth will finally be enough." I laughed once, bitterly. "And it never is. Not for people who need control more than they need relationship." That sentence followed me for days, because it was true. My parents did not want context. They wanted surrender. They wanted a version of me that still stood in hallways trying to prove I was good enough to be treated gently. And the minute I stepped outside that role, they called it rebellion, shame, sin, disgrace, anything but adulthood. The next morning, Morgan came back with coffee, oatmeal, and a printed checklist that made him look even more like the most organized man in Canada. I smiled despite everything. "Did you really make a chart?" He looked almost offended. "Of course I made a chart." Claire laughed from the kitchen. "He copes by becoming a project manager." "That is not a flaw," Morgan called back.
It's not, I said.
"It's honestly kind of beautiful." The chart covered feeding times, medication reminders, document appointments, and a plan for the next 4 days, including one scheduled meeting with Foster to finalize the final presentation set of documents in case my parents escalated, and one appointment related to the parental paperwork process. Everything looked orderly and calm on paper, which was more than I could say for the inside of my chest. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt watched. That was the old conditioning again. The fear that when my parents went quiet, they were not letting go. They were preparing. Sure enough, by noon my mother started texting. "You have no idea what people are saying." Then, "If you think hiding behind strangers will save you from the consequences of this, you are mistaken." Then, "Your father is humiliated. Do you understand what you've done to him?" I did not answer any of them. Foster had already told me clearly, "Do not engage emotionally. Save everything." So I started taking screenshots. That became the second plant in the whole mess. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just evidence. Message after message, timestamp after timestamp, showing exactly how quickly my parents turned themselves into victims while I was still recovering from childbirth. By the second week, I could move a little better, though every simple thing still took energy. Sitting down hurt. Standing up too fast hurt. Laughing hurt. Crying definitely hurt. My apartment smelled like laundry detergent, formula, tea, and the faint medicated scent of healing. It was not glamorous, but it was real, and slowly it became a place where I stopped waiting for judgment to walk through the door. Claire and Morgan never treated me like a scandal to be cleaned up. They treated me like a person who had done something hard and needed care. One afternoon, while Claire folded baby blankets on my couch and Morgan assembled a file box for documents, I asked the question that had been sitting heavy in me. "Do you regret asking me?" Both of them looked up so quickly that I knew I had wounded them. Claire crossed the room at once and sat beside me. "Never." Morgan set down the file box. Not for 1 second. I looked at my hands. Even with all this? Claire reached out and covered them with hers. "Especially because of all this. Isabel, what you did for us is not erased because small-minded people couldn't understand it." Morgan nodded. "Your parents chose a story that made them feel morally superior. That doesn't make it true." I let out a breath I had been holding for days. Then Claire said something that changed me more than she probably realized. "You don't have to spend the rest of your life translating yourself for people who enjoy misunderstanding you." That line hit so deep I felt it in my ribs, because that had been my whole life. Translating.
Softening.
Rearranging facts into shapes my parents might tolerate. Making my pain easier for them to dismiss. Making my choices easier for them to approve of. Shrinking everything true about me until it fit inside their comfort. And all it had ever bought me was temporary quiet. The official legal confirmation process moved forward exactly the way Foster said it would.
Carefully.
Methodically. Properly documented. Every reimbursement record was in order. Every medical note lined up. Every consent form had been signed with independent advice. There was no hidden weakness in the arrangement. No shady corner my parents could point at if they ever decided to challenge me publicly. That was the third thing that strengthened me. The truth was not only moral. It was organized. I had lived so long under accusations that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand on something solid. One evening, about 2.5 weeks after the birth, I finally told Claire the whole truth about my childhood. Not the edited version. Not the "my parents are a little strict" version. The real one. I told her about the silent punishments when I embarrassed my mother socially. The way my father used to inspect my face for attitude before allowing me to leave the table. The time they read my private journal when I was 16 and then told me privacy was something respectful daughters earned. The way I learned to monitor every expression, every outfit, every sentence before it left my mouth. Claire listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked like someone had pressed on an old bruise inside her. "Oh, Isabel," she said quietly. "You were never difficult. You were controlled." Something in me cracked open at that. All those years, my parents had framed me as dramatic whenever I reacted to pressure, immature whenever I wanted independence, ungrateful whenever I asked for dignity. And here was someone saying it plainly. I had not been born wrong. I had been managed. That night, after Claire and Morgan left, I sat alone in my apartment while snowmelt dripped outside the window and the city made its usual soft evening noises. Car tires over slush. A dog barking far away. Somebody upstairs dropping something heavy. The baby was not with me that night anymore because transitions were already becoming more regular and formal, just as planned, but there was still one tiny sleeper folded neatly on the arm of my couch from earlier in the day. I picked it up and cried, not because I was sad the baby would not remain mine. That had never been the arrangement. I cried because for the first time in my life, I had been part of something intimate and life-changing that was not built on control. I had been trusted. And trust, I was learning, can feel almost unbearable when you were raised on fear. By the 4th week, my parents stopped texting me individually and started moving through the family grapevine instead. My cousin Blake called first. "Hey," she said cautiously, "can I ask you something without you biting my head off?" I almost smiled. "That depends on the question." She hesitated. "My mom says Aunt Camille is telling people you got involved with some older married couple and they're trying to buy your silence." I shut my eyes. Of course. Of course my mother could not simply judge me privately. She had to turn it into a full narrative where she was the horrified mother of a fallen daughter being manipulated by immoral strangers. "No," I said flatly. "That's a lie." Blake exhaled. "I figured." "You did?" "Well, yeah, because your mom keeps changing details. In one version, it's your boss. In another version, it's some wealthy man in Edmonton. In another version, you sold your baby, which, sorry, that's the exact phrase I heard, and I hated even repeating it. My stomach turned, but beneath that disgust, another feeling began to rise. Anger. Clean anger this time. Not confused shame. Not self-blame. Anger. I said, "Blake, if the truth came out in front of everyone, would you listen?" There was no hesitation in her answer. Yes. That mattered. Because Blake had always been one of the few people in the family who still felt reachable. Not perfect. Not brave enough to confront my parents outright most of the time. But not cruel either. The kind of person who had learned to survive family politics by staying pleasant. In our family, that counted as almost rebellious. "Okay," I said. "Then I may need you later." "You have me," she replied. After that, the pattern became obvious. My parents were not only rejecting me, they were laying groundwork. They were telling enough people enough lies that when the truth came out, they could claim confusion instead of malice. "Okay," I said. "Then I may need you later." "You have me," she replied. After that, the pattern became obvious. My parents were not only rejecting me, they were laying groundwork. They were telling enough people enough lies that when the truth came out, they could claim confusion instead of malice. Foster was not impressed. When I showed him the screenshots, the call log, and the summary of what Blake had heard, he leaned back in his chair at his office and said, "This is becoming reputationally risky for them." I blinked. "For them?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "Right now they think they are controlling the family story. That works only as long as no one with documented facts contradicts them in a setting they can't dominate." My pulse picked up. "What kind of setting?" He gave me a measured look. "A formal one. Or at least a public family one." At first, I wanted to avoid that entirely. Public confrontation sounded exhausting, embarrassing, dramatic in the worst way. But then my mother made the decision for me. My cousin Blake's bridal shower was scheduled in Red Deer 6 weeks after the birth. Women from both sides of the family would be there. My mother had apparently volunteered to help host. Blake called me herself and asked, carefully, if I was planning to come. I stood by my kitchen counter with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the Calgary skyline blurred by spring rain. If I come, I said slowly, will your aunt make a scene? Blake gave a humorless little laugh. Honestly, I think she already thinks the whole event is her stage. I pictured Camille in a pressed blouse, smiling too brightly, collecting sympathy while pretending to be gracious. I pictured relatives lowering their voices when I walked in. I pictured years of silence hardening into one more permanent lie about who I was. Then I pictured Claire crying when she held her daughter for the first time, and suddenly avoiding discomfort felt insulting to the truth. I asked, would you still want me there if things got awkward? Isabel, Blake said, voice firm now. I'm asking because I want you there. That settled it. After I hung up, I called Claire. She listened quietly, then said, do you want to go? I looked out the window.
No.
She laughed softly. Honest answer. But I think I need to. Then we go prepared.
We. Not you. We.
That word still had the power to undo me. The planning started the next day. Foster assembled a clean document packet. Nothing excessive, nothing theatrical, just enough to establish the essential facts if needed. The lawful private surrogacy arrangement, the timeline, the independent representation, the medical documents, and the records showing Claire and Morgan's parental role. I printed the screenshots of my parents' messages. Claire and Morgan each prepared their own comm statement in case questions were put directly to them. Blake quietly confirmed which relatives were likely to be there, including my Aunt Joanne, who never kept secrets, my Uncle Spencer Laurent, who pretended to hate drama while secretly living for it, and several older women from church who had probably already heard some twisted version from my mother. Part of me dreaded every second. Another part of me was strangely calm, because for the first time, I was not going into a family gathering hoping to survive it. I was going in armed with truth. The morning of the bridal shower, Alberta gave us one of those bright, cold spring days where the sky looks too blue to trust. Claire and Morgan drove with me to Red Deer. Foster met us there separately because he had another appointment in town first. The baby was with Claire and Morgan, of course, secure in her car seat, pink-cheeked, and oblivious to the social earthquake she was about to cause simply by existing. As we drove north, I kept twisting the ring on my finger that I wore when I needed something to do with nervous hands. Claire noticed. Wanted to talk the whole way, so you can't think. I smiled weakly. Can you? Oh, absolutely. I can give you a full rant on school board budget decisions. Morgan made a sound of mock horror from the driver's seat. Please don't frighten Isabel more than necessary. I laughed, and the tension in the car loosened.
That was the thing about them.
They did not only support me in solemn, heavy moments. They made room for breath. By the time we pulled up to the community hall room Blake had rented, my fear had settled into something steadier. Not confidence, exactly, but clarity. Inside, the room was decorated with soft florals, white tablecloths, and trays of squares and tea sandwiches that looked like they had been arranged by people with far more emotional energy than I possessed. Conversations floated around the room in polite little waves until I stepped inside. Then, slowly, voices dipped. I saw it happen in real time. Aunt Joanne's eyebrows lifted. Uncle Spencer stopped reaching for a cookie. Two older women near the gift table leaned closer to each other. And across the room, my mother turned. The expression on Camille's face was worth the drive already. Not because she looked angry, because for one brief second, she looked unsettled. She had not expected me to come. She definitely had not expected me to come with Claire, Morgan, a baby carrier, and a lawyer. My father was there too, which Blake had not mentioned. He stood near the coffee station in a navy blazer, talking to Uncle Spencer. The second he saw me, his whole posture sharpened. Blake hurried over first and hugged me before anyone else could intercept. You came, she whispered. I did. She glanced toward Claire and Morgan and then toward the baby carrier. Okay.
Wow.
I almost smiled. That seems accurate. Then my mother approached. She did not greet Claire. She did not greet Morgan. She looked straight at me and said in a low, tense voice, What are you doing here? I met her gaze. Blake invited me. This is not the place. I heard Foster behind me then. That depends entirely on who starts asking questions. My mother's head turned sharply toward him. She recognized immediately that this was not a random friend. Around us, people had gone almost completely quiet. Blake tried once to save the atmosphere. Maybe everyone could just sit. But my father had already moved toward us. Isabel, he said in that clipped public tone he used when trying to appear composed, you are not going to turn your cousin's event into some spectacle. I looked at him and thought, you should have considered that before weeks of lying. Aloud I said, then maybe nobody here should have been given lies to repeat. Aunt Joan made a tiny sound. One of the older women looked openly thrilled now, which would have been funny in another life. My mother folded her arms. So now you're accusing us? No, I said. I'm correcting you. Her face went rigid. Correcting what? I turned then, slowly, and looked around the room. At Blake. At Joanne. At Spencer. At the women from church. At the cousins pretending not to stare. At my father, who still believed authority alone could control a room. At my mother, who had built herself into the victim so many times, she probably no longer knew where the performance ended. Then I stepped aside. Claire moved forward with the baby in her arms. The room changed instantly. Not because there was a baby, because of the way Claire held her. Not like scandal. Not like evidence. Like a mother. My mother frowned. Who is that? Claire's voice was calm, clear, and perfectly audible to every person in the room. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm the biological mother of this child. Silence. Absolute silence. Even Blake's jaw dropped. My father blinked, once like his mind had failed to process the sentence correctly. What? Claire didn't flinch. This baby is my daughter. Isabel carried her for my husband and me through a private surrogacy arrangement after years of infertility. You could actually hear people breathe in. My mother stared at Claire, then at the baby, then at me.
No.
Morgan stepped beside Claire. Yes. And Foster, with the timing of a man who had clearly done difficult rooms before, opened his leather folder and said, I can confirm the legal documentation if that becomes necessary. Aunt Joan whispered, Oh my God. Uncle Spencer muttered something that sounded like, well, I'll be damned, which felt very on-brand for him. My father found his voice first. This is absurd. Foster's tone remained neutral. It is fully documented. My mother looked at me as if I had committed some completely different offense now. You let us believe. I cut her off.
No.
You chose to believe the ugliest thing possible because it made you feel superior. That landed. I could see it in the slight movement of heads around the room. The moment where people stop merely watching and start reevaluating the story they were told. Camille's voice sharpened. You hid this from your own parents. I laughed once, not kindly.
Yes.
Because you don't handle vulnerable truths with care. You handle them with humiliation. My father stepped forward, face darkening. Watch your tone. And for the first time in my life, in a room full of family, I did not shrink when he said it. No, I replied. You watch yours. The silence after that felt electric. I kept going before old fear could catch up. You showed up at the hospital and demanded a father's name before asking if I was okay. You came to my apartment 3 days after I gave birth and called me a disgrace. You said you would not help a daughter who destroyed the family name. And while I was recovering, you told relatives lies because the truth was too decent for the version of me you prefer. I held up my phone. I saved the messages. My mother went pale. Not dramatic movie pale. Real pale. The kind that starts around the mouth. Aunt Joanne looked between us. Camille, is that true? My mother tried to recover fast. We were confused. She hid everything. Claire answered before I could. She hid it because she was protecting my privacy and my family's privacy, she said. And because, years ago, I watched how frightened she was of disappointing people who only knew how to control her. That hit the room even harder than the surrogacy revelation, because it was no longer only about a misunderstanding. It was about pattern. Morgan added, voice steady. My wife and I trusted Isabel with the most precious thing in our lives. She acted with courage, dignity, and extraordinary care. The shame here does not belong to her. I saw Blake put a hand over her mouth. My father looked around the room and realized, maybe for the first time in his life, that the crowd was no longer bending toward him. That was the shift. You could feel it. In my family, perception was power. My parents had always known how to win by framing themselves as the respectable center and me as the emotional problem orbiting around them. But in that hall, with a baby in Claire's arms and documents in Foster's folder and witnesses all around, the center moved. My mother tried one last angle. "If this was all so noble," she said tightly, "why not tell us from the beginning?" I looked straight at her, because when I was a child having panic attacks, you called me dramatic. When I wanted privacy, you called me secretive. When I wanted independence, you called me rebellious. You taught me that any truth I gave you would be used against me. And you were right. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. I think that was the moment that affected me most. Not because I had won some argument, but because I had finally said aloud what had been true for years, and the ceiling did not collapse. The room did not swallow me. I did not die from honesty. Blake's mother, Aunt Joanne, spoke next, almost to herself. So, she carried a baby for someone who once helped her. Claire turned toward her. Yes. Aunt Joanne looked at me with something close to shame. Isabel, that's a beautiful thing. I had not expected that. Not from her. Not from anyone in that room. And maybe that was why my eyes suddenly burned. Uncle Spencer cleared his throat. "Thomas, Camille, you two made it sound like she'd done something disgraceful." My father stiffened. We acted on what we were given. "No," Blake said, finally stepping in with more force than I had ever heard from her. "You acted on what made you look righteous." My mother turned on her. "Blake, this is not your place." "It kind of is," Blake shot back. "You turned my bridal shower into a courtroom before Isabel even got here." That almost made me laugh. Foster took exactly one sheet from his folder and handed it to my Aunt Joanne, who was standing closest and apparently too stunned to refuse. That page summarizes the arrangement in plain terms. Joanne read the first few lines, eyes moving quickly. Then she handed it to Uncle Spencer. No one needed every legal detail. They only needed enough to understand that the story my parents had spread was false. The room did the rest. Quiet whispers broke out again, but now they sounded different. Not scandalized. Corrective. Surrogacy. So Claire's the mother. She carried the baby for them. After all they said, my mother's face had lost all color by then. My father looked less pale and more furious, but even his anger seemed unstable now, because anger only works when people still assume you must be right. I took one step closer to both of them. "You abandoned me 3 days after I gave birth," I said. "Do you understand that? You left me hurting, bleeding, exhausted, and accused. Not because I had done something immoral, because you preferred gossip to truth." My father's mouth tightened. "We did not know. You did not ask." That landed so hard, he actually looked away. For my father, that was almost a confession. My mother's eyes filled, but I knew her too well to mistake that immediately for remorse. Camille cried whenever public sympathy was slipping out of reach. Tears, for her, were often strategy before they were grief. She whispered, "We were trying to protect the family." I shook my head.
No.
"You were trying to protect your image." By then, the event was no longer salvageable as a normal bridal shower, and somehow Blake seemed perfectly fine with that. She came over to stand beside me, shoulder almost touching mine. "I'm really glad you came," she said softly. "So am I admitted." Claire shifted the baby slightly in her arms, and the little girl made a tiny sleepy sound, completely unimpressed by generational dysfunction. A few people laughed under their breath, which broke some of the tension. Then, in the quiet that followed, I said the last thing I needed to say. "You told me I destroyed the family name. But the truth is, I gave life to a family that understands gratitude better than the one I came from." My mother closed her eyes. My father said nothing. And that silence, from two people who had controlled me with words for years, felt like the first real proof that they could not reach me the same way anymore. After that, the room slowly reorganized itself. Some people moved toward Claire and Morgan with tentative questions, genuine ones this time. Aunt Jo and even apologized to Claire for all the misunderstanding, which was not exactly heroic, but it was more humility than I had expected from her. Blake steered several relatives toward the dessert table with the determined energy of someone trying to preserve at least one polite layer over the ruins. My parents left first. No dramatic speech. No last command. No noble exit. They simply picked up their coats and walked out under the weight of a room that was no longer willing to help them lie. I watched them go and felt something strange. Not triumph, exactly. Relief. Because I had spent so many years imagining that confronting them publicly would destroy me. Instead, it clarified me. The consequences came faster than I expected. Within days, relatives who had gone silent started messaging me. Some were sincere. Some were nosy. Some were clearly trying to figure out whether they needed to switch sides more visibly. I answered only a few. Blake and I, surprisingly, became closer. Not instantly, not dramatically, but in a real way. She started calling me, without family gossip attached. She even drove down to Calgary once with coffee and flowers and admitted, "I knew Aunt Camille was harsh, but I don't think I understood how deep it went." "You weren't supposed to," I told her. "Families like ours survive on selective blindness." She nodded slowly.
Yeah.
"That sounds right." As for my parents, the first message from my mother came 4 days after the shower. "I made mistakes. I want to talk." No apology for the hospital. No apology for my apartment. No apology for the lies. Just mistakes. Passive, floating, ownerless mistakes. I showed Claire and laughed in disbelief. She still can't say what she did. Claire sipped her tea, because naming it would require humility. My father didn't message at all for nearly 2 weeks. When he finally did, it was only one line. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." That told me everything I needed to know. Not "you hurt us." Not "we are ashamed of ourselves."
Not "we handled this badly."
"You embarrassed us." Even then, reputation first. I didn't answer either of them. Foster advised me to keep communication limited and written if possible, especially while emotions were still high. People who lose control of the narrative often try to regain control through selective apology, he said. Selective apology, I repeated. That's painfully accurate. He nodded. It sounds soft, but it usually means they want reconciliation without accountability. So I waited, and in the quiet that followed, my life kept moving forward. That part matters, because stories like this can make it seem as if the confrontation is the ending. It wasn't. It was the pivot. The real ending was slower and softer. Spring settled properly over Alberta. The snow finally gave up. Sidewalks dried. The sky stayed lighter longer. I regained strength little by little. I started working again, in small blocks from home. I slept better. I stopped checking my locks twice. I stopped jumping every time my phone lit up. I started feeling like my apartment was mine again, not a place where shame had been dumped and left behind. Claire and Morgan settled into their new life as parents with the kind of grateful exhaustion that somehow made even their tiredness look full of meaning. They sent me photos constantly at first, tiny fingers curled around Morgan's thumb, the baby asleep on Claire's chest, a ridiculous little knit hat that made her look like a pink acorn. I loved all of it, not from a distance of regret, from a place of peace. I had known from the beginning what this was, but knowing something in your mind and living through the aftershocks in your heart are two different things. There were moments, of course, when I cried after they left. Moments when the apartment felt too quiet after a day full of baby sounds. Moments when I missed the closeness of those first weeks. But none of that changed the truth. I had not lost a child. I had helped create a family, and in the process, I had stumbled into one for myself. It happened gradually. Claire started introducing me differently to people. Not our surrogate. Not our friend Isabel. She would say, "This is Isabel. She's family." The first time she said it in front of me, I nearly stopped breathing.
Family.
A word that had always felt conditional in my parents' house suddenly sounded like shelter. Morgan meant it too. He proved that in small ways, which are usually the ways that matter most. He fixed the loose shelf in my kitchen one Saturday without making a big deal of it. He dropped off groceries when he was already doing his own run. He texted me once during a thunderstorm because he remembered I used to get anxious when the power flickered. "You good?" the message said. Simple, uncomplicated, caring. I didn't know what to do with that kind of ordinary kindness at first. Then I got used to it. And once I got used to it, I realized how starved I had been. By summer, my mother had sent 3 more messages, each one trying a different angle. "I miss my daughter. We should not let outsiders come between family. You will understand when you have children of your own." That last one almost made me laugh out loud. Understand what? That love gives you ownership? That shame is a parenting tool? That judgment matters more than listening? For once, I didn't twist myself up trying to write the perfect answer. I wrote one simple response. If you ever want a real conversation, it starts with the truth. You abandoned me when I was vulnerable and lied about me afterward. Until you can say that clearly, there is nothing to discuss. She did not reply. That silence told me more than any confession could have. My father remained even simpler. He stayed away. At first I thought that would hurt. Instead, it felt clean. I think some people expect healing to mean reunion. But sometimes healing is just the moment you stop mistaking distance for loss. The social consequences reached my parents in their own circles too. I heard about it in pieces. A church friend who stopped asking my mother for advice. A relative who politely corrected a rumor in public. Someone in Red Deer who told Blake's mother that Camille owed Isabel a very big apology. Nothing dramatic enough for television. Just the slow collapse of a reputation built on confidence instead of character. That was enough. As for me, my world became smaller in the best possible way. Not smaller like trapped. Smaller like real. My apartment. My work. Weekend visits with Claire and Morgan. Baby photos. Coffee with Blake sometimes. Peaceful evenings with windows open and no fear of criticism walking in behind me. Some therapy too, because I finally admitted that surviving control is not the same as healing from it. My therapist said something in one session that stayed with me. Children raised under emotional control often confuse being needed with being loved. I sat there staring at the tissue in my hand because that sentence explained half my life. My parents needed me to be obedient, reflective, presentable, explainable. Claire and Morgan loved me without needing me to disappear into their expectations. Those are not the same thing. The last time I saw my parents in person that year was by accident at a farmer's market in Red Deer when I had driven up with Blake. My mother saw me first. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure whether to approach. My father stood beside her, older somehow, not frail, just less certain. For a second, the old reflex kicked in, the instinct to straighten up, soften my face, prepare to absorb impact. Then it passed. I stayed exactly as I was. My mother took a step toward me. "Isabel." I held up a hand, not rudely, just clearly. "Not here."
She stopped.
There was so much unfinished history between us, so many years of things she would probably never name. But standing there under the bright Alberta sun, beside crates of strawberries and local honey, and people living their ordinary lives around us, I realized I no longer needed that moment from her. I no longer needed the perfect apology to prove I had been wronged. I already knew.
So, did she?
So did everyone who mattered. Blake squeezed my arm and asked quietly, "You okay?" I looked at my mother, then at my father, then back at Blake. "Yes," I said. And for once, I really was. Now, when I visit Claire and Morgan's house, their daughter runs toward the door with the unstoppable energy of a child who knows she's adored. She has Morgan's eyelashes, Claire's smile, and a laugh that sounds like nothing bad has ever touched the world. Sometimes she calls me Isabel. Sometimes she calls me Auntie Is. The first time she did that, Claire smiled and said, "Seems right to me."
It did.
It still does. And every now and then, When I sit at their kitchen table while Claire packs school snacks and Morgan pretends not to be emotionally manipulated by a toddler demanding a third storybook, I think about the sentence my mother threw at me in my apartment. We will not help a daughter who destroyed the family name. Back then, it was meant to crush me. Now it sounds like proof of how little they understood. Because the truth is, I did lose something after giving birth. I lost the last illusion that my parents' approval was the same thing as love. But what I gained was better. I gained the kind of family that shows up with groceries, legal documents, patience, truth, and room to breathe. I gained people who did not need me to become smaller in order to belong. I gained a life where sacrifice was honored instead of twisted into shame. And, maybe most important of all, I gained myself back. Now I know I was never the disgrace in that story. I was simply the first person brave enough to stop repeating my parents' lie. From everything I went through, I learned that not everyone who shares your blood knows how to love you well, and not every act of sacrifice will be understood by people who only think in terms of appearances. If you are ever in a situation where the truth in your heart is cleaner than the story others are spreading about you, hold on to the truth and let time expose the rest. And please remember this too. The family that saves you may not always be the one you were born into. Before you go, I want to hear from you in a different way today. First, tell me in the comments, do you think Isabel's parents deserve another chance? Or did they lose that when they abandoned her after birth? Second, have you ever had someone outside your blood family protect you more genuinely than your own relatives did? Third, if this story made you feel angry, relieved, or emotional in any way, tell me which moment hit you hardest, because for me it was the moment Claire walked in and changed the whole room without raising her voice. And finally, if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that dignity does not disappear just because cruel people refuse to understand it. Please like the video, subscribe, and stay with me for the next story.